Oh, what a blessing you are, Anne Marie. Will you pray with me, please? God of created differences, God of great love, we are so differently created by you, and yet we share important truths and identity. For we are yours, and you call each of us your beloved. We gather today to hear a word from you. We are sitting at your feet, listening just like Mary. Grace us with your presence and speak to us that we, like Mary, will be fed and guided by your Spirit. May we offer Martha's hospitality to those we meet and those we know, that your love might be experienced through us in different ways, through the ways we are different. May we all hear, see, and be blessed, and love always be the most important thing. We pray this in your many holy and sacred names. Amen. Amen. I have to admit, after this past week's news cycle, in which we saw the verbal attack on 4 congresswomen, I couldn't help but see Martha and Mary with a very different perspective. How we treat each other, in particular women, is something that has taken the spotlight now for a while. And truth, it has been a long time and a long, hard road for women in equal rights, protection, and equal pay, and they are not yet achieved by any stretch. So let's have a careful read of what is going on in our story this morning to see what important message we might hear amidst the noise and distraction of gender roles and gender conformity. It is in this light that I ask us to look at this familiar story throughout, though I would not necessarily call it popular. There is a long church history of using this story to praise the role of a devoted disciple sitting at the foot of Jesus. We just overlook the fact that she's female. And to demean Martha for being overwhelmed, emotional, and resentful as she erupts in anger and with confrontation. I would add this story is often used to encourage and define the role of women and to define women's work. I like to let that sit for a moment, because we should all bristle at that, all genders, the language of gender, this language that we constrict one another with. First, let's take a closer look at Martha. I see Martha as the original Martha Stewart. No TV show, not famous, but typically a really great host. And likely this passage does her a great injustice in judging her for this one very human moment, a tendency we see so often today. Martha is actually quite unusual for her times. She owns her own home where she and Mary live, a fact that is often quite unusual, as it appears that both Mary and Martha don't have husbands. They live with their brother Lazarus. So here we have 2 single adult women of means who are accomplished and competent at managing their lives, having autonomy and making choices, in a time when property was owned and women's lives were controlled by males. I might add that the cultural norms kept women at home with their fathers until marriage was arranged, which typically happened when the young woman was between the ages of 12 and 14. I would also add for your scandalous consideration that we don't know for sure these women are actually related. It would not be a huge stretch to see these women as a couple, calling themselves sisters to avoid public scrutiny and judgment. How many women around the world have used and continue to use words like roommate and partner and sister to keep safe? And having a male friend like Lazarus and calling him brother certainly would have added a bit of safety to that scenario. But I digress. What we do know is there was an incident during which Jesus makes this unexpected visit to visit these 2 women, and it puts these 2 women at odds. And we do it quite a great disservice to both women if we relegate them to stereotypical gender roles and then judge them. We know well that for Jesus, there's always something much more important and something deeper going on in each of these stories, something more at stake. Let us then proceed with caution, because the story touches upon an issue that lingers and haunts us still today, that often puts women still at odds and even in competition with each other over political and religious matters, and then judged often quite harshly by social expectations and gender roles that we have created as a social construct. Just this week, Didn't we see 4 congresswomen judged with prejudice? Why weren't these 4 women home where they belong, taking care of the household like Mary? More than this, it was viciously added that home is the one where they came from, not the United States. Comments that are both racist and misogynistic. We have work to do. Martha and Mary cry out this morning that we must do better. And so we'll attempt to do that as we look at this particular story. Martha was not one to be confined or limited, for she is the homeowner. And per religious requirements and cultural expectation, Martha was required to provide hospitality. In this story, Martha is worried and distracted by many things, understandably so. There was more pressure on her as a woman in a man's world, especially during these times. And no doubt she was not recognized for her accomplishments or applauded for what she had achieved, a congresswoman in her own right. Can we feel compassion for Martha, who must have been concerned there was not enough food for the many that were unexpected and guests in her home? Perhaps she even felt a bit of shame that she was not providing the expected and customary level of hospitality. Clearly, there was so much on Martha's mind and much she had to do, and her only help was Mary, since men expected to be served. Then we have Mary, who is also doing something quite countercultural and sitting at Jesus' feet. The feet of a man who was not her husband, which was culturally scandalous. And sitting like a male student as Mary received the teachings of this rabbi, surprising and shocking. Mary was likely bringing shame to the household in this moment by her actions, and yet we get a sense that Mary doesn't care at all about this. What we have in this story is gender nonconformance as it was seen in the ancient times and in ancient terms back 2,000 years ago. There were laws then too, often left unspoken, yet just as binding. In this moment, Mary seems to be oblivious about Martha's concerns, and Martha begins to fume with resentment until she cracks with a display of anger and then confronts Jesus, not Mary, accusing Jesus of not caring and demanding that Jesus make Mary help me. What an awkward moment we are witnessing in this story. And I'm sure we have all had family squabbles and blow-ups like this. Could we remember a moment like this? All of our families do this sort of stuff. And it's painful for sure. And if you remember back, then maybe you bring a little pain to this particular story too, in this moment that is real to us. And yet, rather than taking sides, I think we can have compassion for Martha, who needs and deserves help. While at the same time, we might also hunger like Mary for a moment to be in the presence of God. The story raises an age-old conflict in theology and church teaching. Is the word greater than the work? Is it better to sit than to serve? That's what this story puts at odds. And the answer can be found in Jesus' response, and more by what Jesus does not do. Jesus does not judge Martha for her busyness. Jesus does not make her ministry, Martha's ministry of hospitality, less than Mary's ministry of listening and learning. All ministry is important, and Jesus affirms this. And I believe that when Jesus says, Martha, Martha, it is said with deep compassion and not dismissively. Martha, Martha, Martha. What Jesus then points out is that Martha is distracted with many things. Mary is focused on one thing, that which is most important. This is the same conflict we have every day, isn't it? What is most important? Are we doing the one good thing rather than following the distractions, the shiny keys as we call them, that pull us in so many directions to the point where we, like Martha, become overwhelmed, angry, and resentful? Do we resent others for choosing what gives them life abundant, love unbridled, and prevailing peace? Do we judge when people do things differently than we expect, that for them may be the better thing? It may be for them the better thing. In this scriptural story this morning, both Martha and Mary are disciples. And I want you to hear that. They are even called in translation disciples. And Jesus sees them as such. I believe it is a mistake to reduce the story to Jesus that to Jesus privileging Mary over Martha, and that sitting is more valuable than doing. That misses the deeper point altogether. To Jesus it is both and. Jesus is helping with prioritizing this morning, encouraging us to see what is the most important thing, and have us sit and look at it, listen to it, notice it, so that we don't miss those moments in our lives. To understand how profound and important this point is for Jesus, and it is, we need to see the shadow of Jerusalem hanging over the story. Jesus knew he was visiting his dear friends Martha and Mary for the last time. And they are his dear friends. But it is for the last time. For he's on his way to Jerusalem, where he's already stated twice, it is a place he will die. So while Martha was multitasking and worrying about getting everything done and meeting everyone's expectations, Jesus knew what she did not know, that she was missing the last opportunity to spend time with him. This particular moment, this relationship, was more important than any task, and Martha was too busy to see that. This is such a clear message for us still today, for our Martha world is what we live in, where multitasking is a way of life, and we live in a culture of hectic schedules, relentless pursuit of progress, endless to-do lists. We are tempted to measure our worth and the worth of others in terms of what is accomplished and how well we meet others' expectations, just like Martha. We are focused on how we are seen and judged by the world around us. And I dare say, we sometimes join in with the crowd to do the very same thing. And in so doing, we may very well miss an important moment and lasting memory, and truthfully, there will never be enough time to do it all. And we all know that, though we work feverishly and relentlessly to get everything done. And whatever we choose, we must choose to do it with love. This was true for Mary, not so much for Martha. Martha provides us with a warning this morning that to ignore the one good thing, the most important thing, over time can cause us to lose our way and even our loving natures to stress, resentment, and confrontation. We will not act like ourselves, and that's a warning shot to us that we've gone too far in giving up and away ourselves to this world and its demands on us. And it can rob us of moments that we truly will cherish for all of our lives. And equally important is to see that Jesus did not follow the religious and cultural rules of his day. Martha and Mary were good disciples in this respect. They were following him better than the world at large does today. Jesus loved, taught, and spent time equally with women as he did with men. We can just imagine the outrage by men when Jesus visited the home of these two unmarried women and then sat and taught one of the women who, in that moment, Jesus chose to make equally a disciple. I wonder, was Mary transgender? Was she a lesbian in a committed relationship with Martha? Was she a woman of color? Was she a woman that had perhaps a different faith or maybe no faith at all? Was Mary an immigrant or refugee? We don't know the answers to any of those questions because it's not important to the story, and it wasn't important to Jesus. We do know that Jesus would have welcomed them equally, given dignity to, and in whom he would have seen worth in them all and us all today. This is the one we follow. This Jesus of Nazareth, who welcomed equally, loved unconditionally, and who turned over the tables of injustice. As followers of the way, disciples of Jesus, we too are called to do the same in Congress, at the Mexican border, and everywhere Jesus leads us. I have 3 prayers for us this morning. My first is that we always see the most important thing, the better part, as Mary did, whatever that might be in the given moment, so that we never miss it. My second prayer is that we do everything with love, listening to the messages from God with the heart of Jesus. And lastly, my prayer is that we do not judge the Marthas and the Marys of this world or any other human moment in their lives as a standalone and a summary of them as people. We don't know how Martha and Mary's story end. Did Mary eventually help? Did Martha put down the apron and sit with Jesus and Mary? Or did they both leave that home, follow Jesus in ministry to the cross? We don't know. We are left wondering. And that's possibly and probably the author's intention all along, to leave the question open for each of us to write the end of the story for ourselves. May we always remember that we have the freedom to Martha and the freedom to Mary. And just as important, we also have a calling to love and welcome the Marthas and Marys in our midst, for we are them. Yes, we are all different, and yet we share the same identity, beloved by God. May our differences be a gift and our strength every day.